I'm going to talk about negotiating your worth. So actually, this did come from some of the more qualitative results on the survey, which I found really fascinating. So I'm going to dive into that into a second because I think it's really worth double clicking on. So it's related, don't worry. But for those of you who don't know me, I'm Henry Draper. I'm the managing partner of Albany. If you haven't heard of Albany before, we're a specialist in tech and product hiring. We exclusively work with private equity firms and venture capital firms, and we have a set of integrated solutions that help clients solve three critical challenges. The first one being immediate leadership gaps, requiring interim or fractional or advisory. Those are more time-sensitive challenges that our clients have. The second is strategic executive search. So that's permanent hires needed to scale or transform organizations. And the third is through our Albany growth recruitment business, and that is a team building mechanism. So software teams and product teams from that head of level all the way down to individual contribution levels. So that's my shameless promotion for this session. So if you are hiring, come tap me up. I'd be more than happy to help. We've been a really proud partner of CTO Craft for a long time. I forget how many years, but we've seen the network grow, and that's been really exciting. We are close to launching the 4th edition of our annual compensation survey, and this insight actually came out of it, that only 50% of CTOs feel confident in negotiating their own salaries, which I find absolutely fascinating, because a lot of those same CTOs, you guys in this room, you are negotiating multi-million-pound vendor contracts. You're negotiating cloud agreements. You're managing enormous budgets for transformation. But yet, when the conversation comes to your own value, the confidence drops. So today, I wanted to share a very practical framework. It's 2 different situations, 2 conversations, and a few ways to approach them that make the conversations feel structured and calm and commercially credible. I know that compensation does invoke some quite emotional responses. We've got a lot tied up in compensation, but I think at an executive level, it's not about emotion. It's really not. It's about, next slide. It's about scope, impact, market, and risk. Boards don't pay CTOs for effort. They pay for risk reduction and enterprise value creation. So if the platform is stable, if delivery is predictable, if technology is enabling growth, that has a direct influence on company value. So the starting point is pretty simple. If you influence or impact enterprise value, your compensation should reflect that. There are 2 very different negotiation environments that CTOs find themselves in. The first is with your current employer, and the second is with a prospective employer at offer stage. And those environments behave very, very differently. Internally, the conversation is about retention and alignment. Externally, the conversation is about market value and selection. It's different psychology. Your leverage is different, and the rules are very different. So when does compensation legitimately change? In most organizations, there are 3 drivers. The first one is your scope increases, so your role becomes bigger. The second is your impact increases, so your contribution to outcomes becomes far clearer. And the third is the market rate moves. If none of these have changed, then realistically, you're asking for goodwill. But if even one of these things has moved, then the conversation becomes more of one of alignment than anything else. So when you're talking to your current employer, structure really matters. You don't want to open with emotion. That's absolutely not the right approach. You don't want to open straight out the bat with numbers. You want to open with alignment. And a simple way to frame this conversation is, I want to ensure my compensation reflects the scope and impact of the role as it stands today. I've gathered some relevant market data. Would you be open to reviewing it together and setting some time to discuss? That approach does a couple of things. It removes any emotion. It introduces data slowly, and it creates a structured conversation rather than an emotional one or that awkward moment in the corridor where you're asking your boss if you could catch them for 2 minutes and they know exactly what it's about. Then the questions become things like, how do we benchmark this role internally? How do you see the scope today versus when I joined? And if there is a gap, what do we need to do to close it? You're not arguing, you're facilitating a review. There is a commercial reality here that when the market moves, companies don't automatically adjust compensation. And when these conversations crop up with one of their employees, they have a decision. They either reprice the role or they replace the person. And that decision isn't emotional, it's economic. Replacing a senior technology executive isn't cheap. It usually involves recruiter fees. We're quite expensive. A market premium. You're going through a selection process. That's going to drive the price up. There's months of hiring time. For a CTO hire, it takes the average recruitment or search agency 3 months to run that process. Then on average, there's a 3-month notice period. And then there's onboarding time. Then there's ramp-up time. So there's onboarding risk. There's delivery disruption. So a replacement is rarely cheaper. But the uncomfortable truth here is your leverage internally comes from 2 or 3 things. Market demand. How often are you being approached? Now, how many messages do you get from me on LinkedIn? Business criticality. What breaks if you leave? Who else walks out if you leave? I call it the Pied Piper effect. And the scarcity of the replacement. How many people are there with your skill set and experience in the market that your employer could run a process and find? If none of those apply, then the conversation is a bit harder. So the key principle is simple. Don't argue fairness, present economics, and be honest about the leverage that you have. And that leads us to the second scenario. Because internally, leverage is contextual, but externally, leverage is structural. When you're negotiating with your current employer, you're influencing a retention decision. But when you're negotiating an offer, you are the scarce asset, and the rules change. So like everything in life, timing is literally everything. And in an interview process, your leverage peaks at a very, very precise moment. The moment when they say, we'd like to make you an offer. Before that, they're still evaluating you. You're still in that selection process. And after that, they've made their decision. If you've accepted an offer, it's really difficult to renegotiate it. And one of the most common mistakes that CTOs make is negotiating too early. If you're under pressure by a recruiter or by a business to soft close you on some numbers before the selection has been made, that's an asymmetric relationship, and you're not in the driving seat. You're in the driving seat when you are the scarce commodity and when you are the person in a distilled process that they want to make an offer to. The next mistake that we see quite a lot is CTOs mainly focusing on salary. But compensation isn't just salary. There's bonus. There's equity. Alongside that, there's the vesting terms. There are annual compensation reviews that you can bake into contracts. There are benefits. There are working conditions. And, of course, there's role scope. And the truth is that most CTOs only focus on salary. And the best ones negotiate ownership. So there are some questions that can shift outcomes. So when you receive an offer, the logic is to the goal is to understand the logic behind it. So a really useful starting question would be, can you walk me through how you structured the package? And then you can go into, how was the base and compensation benchmarked? How important is the role strategically? Do you see this role having an impact on enterprise value? And if there isn't any movement on salary, try and widen the conversation to the others, to the other aspects of a package. You need to try and increase the surface area. So then you can dive into equity, sign-on bonuses, and any other form of participation. I wanted to close with a very short story, don't worry. A tale of two CTOs. We ran a process a couple of years ago, CTO process for a growth stage business. The process went well, as you'd expect me to say. We got a candidate to offer stage, and during the negotiations, the candidate made a very, very different decision. They decided to accept a counteroffer. So he rejected the offer and decided to stay with his business. They increased his base salary by 25K, and he felt pretty good about that. He thought that would have an impact on his lifestyle. The equity in the new role felt a bit abstract, a bit uncertain, and we reran the search. Short time later, we had another CTO at offer stage, and she negotiated very, very differently. She placed less emphasis on base salary. She actually called that a hygiene factor, and she focused more on the long-term incentives, on equity, on the vesting schedule, on making sure that the timeline associated with that equity participation was well understood and well modeled. A few years later, the company exited, and hey presto, the difference was not £25,000. It was more like £1.5 million. Both brilliant CTOs, both worked incredibly hard, but one optimized for certainty and the other optimized for upside. So I wanted to leave you with a final thought. Salary pays your lifestyle. Equity can change your life. Not always. There is an asterisk above that. It isn't about greed. It's about alignment. If you are accountable for enterprise value, or if you contribute towards it, you should participate in enterprise value. If you carry risk, which all of us do in this room, you should share reward. And ultimately, the way you handle these conversations sends a message. It sends a signal on how you see yourself, but also how you expect to be seen. So negotiate like the executives you already are. That's me.